Dyslexia is a common neurodevelopmental disorder. There have been many definitions of dyslexia in the past, and much debate as to how it should be defined has led to confusion and misinformation. A recent Delphi study, including a panel of experts, has established areas of consensus and created an updated definition that reflects the current scientific research. The panel agreed on the following. Dyslexia is a set of processing difficulties that affect the acquisition of reading and spelling. Difficulties in reading fluency and spelling are key markers of dyslexia. Dyslexic difficulties exist on a continuum and can be experienced to various degrees of severity. The nature of dyslexia depends on multiple genetic and environmental influences. Dyslexia can affect the acquisition of other skills, such as mathematics, reading comprehension, or learning another language. The most commonly observed cognitive impairment in dyslexia is a difficulty in phonological processing. However, phonological difficulties do not fully explain the variability that is observed. Working memory, processing speed, and orthographic skills can contribute to the impact of dyslexia. We will look at each of these in more detail. When looking at Scarborough's reading rope and thinking about dyslexia, we're mostly concerned with the word recognition strands of the rope. Difficulties in language comprehension are more related to conditions like developmental language disorder. Dyslexia is primarily a set of processing difficulties that affect the acquisition of reading and spelling, despite the educational opportunity to learn these skills. Reading and spelling difficulties are key markers of dyslexia across all languages. These difficulties are often unexpected, based on age, instruction, intervention, or levels of attainment in other areas. So literacy attainment below expectations is central to dyslexia. Dyslexia, however, can have an impact on other areas of learning, such as maths and languages. And the difficulties that we commonly see in dyslexia can also be found in other conditions, such as ADHD. We'll come back to this later. So what causes dyslexia? The research here is ongoing, but we know that there are multiple factors that have significant independent roles. There are multiple genetic and environmental factors at play. A history of dyslexia in the family is a significant risk factor. Dyslexia is much more likely to occur if it is present in the family. The most commonly observed cognitive issue in dyslexia is a difficulty in phonological processing and is seen in around 9 out of 10 dyslexics. Phonological processing includes phonological awareness, phonological memory, and phonological processing. Phonological awareness is the ability to analyse and manipulate the sound structure of words. Phonological memory refers to the short-term memory for verbal information. And phonological processing speed includes rapid automized naming, or RAN, of familiar symbols, pictures, colours, or letters. Phonological difficulties are predictive of difficulties in word reading and spelling. However, they do not fully explain the variability that is observed. Other factors that can contribute to dyslexia are working memory, general processing speed, and orthographic processing, although there is no evidence that these are causal. Working memory is how we hold short-term or temporary information in the mind while using that information to accomplish a task, like reading or spelling. Orthographic processing refers to the ability to form and retrieve letters, letter sequences, and spelling patterns, and is commonly impaired in dyslexia. So how common is dyslexia? Reported rates vary quite a lot, but usually somewhere between 5% and 20% of the population. That means that in a class of 25 children, up to 5 children may be dyslexic. The rates vary because they depend on the cut-off criteria used. And as there are no clear cut-off points, dyslexia is actually best thought of as a continuum rather than a distinct category. Think of reading ability in the general population as a continuum, from those who experience difficulties with reading to those for whom reading comes easily. Now think of dyslexia as a subset of that continuum. And now we can see that dyslexic difficulties can be experienced to various degrees of severity. Dyslexia also occurs across a range of intellectual abilities with no direct relationship to IQ. Older definitions described a discrepancy between intellectual ability and reading skills, but this discrepancy model is no longer used. An unexpected discrepancy between intellectual abilities and reading and spelling attainments is a potential indicator of dyslexia, but should not be considered necessary or sufficient for diagnosis, because dyslexia can affect people of any cognitive ability. There are high rates of co-occurrence between dyslexia and other developmental difficulties, such as ADHD, developmental language disorder, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. This overlap happens not only in terms of diagnosis, but also with the features of each of these conditions. It is important to identify children at risk for dyslexia and reading difficulties as early as possible. Universal screening can be used to assess all children for risk from their very first year at school. Early indicators of dyslexia and reading difficulties include phonemic awareness and letter sound knowledge. For children identified as at risk, administer further assessments to determine instructional needs. Provide support to the children at risk as soon as possible, regardless of diagnosis. This support should be provided in line with the continuum of support. And always, for children with reading difficulties, monitor their progress closely. It's important to remember that support should be given to all children with literacy difficulties, regardless of their diagnosis or other factors. All children struggling with literacy require appropriate, targeted intervention, monitoring, and resources. Those with dyslexia benefit from a structured literacy approach. That is, explicit and systematic instruction in all of the important components of literacy. There are many programs available for dyslexic children, but not all fit the criteria for a structured literacy approach. Dyslexia Ireland have created a guidance document for schools to help when selecting interventions for dyslexic learners. This document is available in the download section, and you will also find a link to a webinar that goes through the document in detail. Let's dispel some common dyslexia myths. Dyslexia means you are stupid. Dyslexia can only be diagnosed if you have an average or above average IQ. Now, as we have learned already, dyslexia is not related to intelligence, so we can discount the first two myths straight away. Dyslexics see letters backwards. While it is extremely common for young children to reverse letters and numbers, this is a normal part of development as they learn to read and write. dyslexia can only be diagnosed from the age of 8. Well, actually, dyslexia can be diagnosed towards the end of the second year of formal schooling, so the end of senior infants. There is no reason to delay diagnosis any longer than this. Dyslexia affects more boys than girls. While more boys might get diagnosed with dyslexia, it's actually equally common in boys and girls. Boys are just more likely to show external signs of struggle than girls do. Dyslexia is a vision problem that can be remediated with coloured lenses or overlays. Difficulties with visual stress are separate from dyslexia and should be treated separately. Coloured lenses or overlays cannot replace a structured literacy intervention. And lastly, dyslexics are gifted in other areas and can think outside of the box. Some prominent people with dyslexia are very successful, such as Jamie Oliver, Richard Branson, and some of them attribute their success to dyslexic thinking, relating to creativity or visual spatial thinking. However, the research has not shown a relationship between dyslexia and creativity. People with dyslexia may develop other skills as an adaptive process to compensate for their literacy-based difficulties. Nessie Learning have done a lot of work in advocating for dyslexic learners. Their website is well worth checking out. There's lots of free resources. They have 2 free ebooks that you can download called Dyslexia Explained and What I Need, and I have included these in the downloads. I also highly recommend checking out the Dyslexia Ireland and International Dyslexia Association's websites for up-to-date information, advice and resources.